Mara Ellison scraped frost from the inside of her windshield with the edge of an expired library card, pushing the white curls into the corner of the glass where they melted against the dashboard and ran down in thin, dirty lines. The hatchback had quit blowing heat 2 towns back. Now, it sat beneath the yellow pump lights of a closed gas station outside Briar Glen, West Virginia, shivering whenever the wind crossed the empty road. She had slept sitting up for 3 nights. The first night she had told herself it was temporary. The second, she had folded her mother's red scarf under her cheek and pretended the vinyl seat was only uncomfortable, not dangerous. By the third, her toes had gone numb inside work boots with cracked soles, and the shame of being seen had become smaller than the fear of not waking. In the cup holder were $37.80 in folded bills, and change a receipt for gas, and the phone number of a diner manager who had said gently that business slowed down before Christmas. Her last rented room was already painted over. Her mother's medical bills were in a folder behind the passenger seat, clipped so neatly they looked like someone else's problem. Mara breathed into her hands and watched the fog spread across the glass again. Across the road, beyond a municipal salt pile and a row of bare sycamores, stood an old brick fire station with 2 sagging bay doors and a narrow tower rising at the back like a stiff finger held up against the dark. One upstairs window was cracked in the shape of a bent star. Ivy gripped the east wall even after the leaves had gone brown. A rusted bell hung under a small roof-lined bracket above the front, its mouth black with weather. She had noticed it in daylight while walking from the gas station to the town office, hoping for a bulletin board. A church notice, any printed proof that work still existed somewhere nearby. The station had been empty then, too. No trucks, no flags, no tire marks except old arcs ground into the concrete apron. A paper sign inside the front glass read, "Municipal property no entry," but the ink had faded to the color of weak tea. By 10 that night, sleet had begun to tick against the hatchback. By 11, Mara could no longer feel the tip of her nose. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. She waited until the last pickup left the gas station lot. Then she put on her faded navy coat, pulled the gray knit cap low over her ears, and climbed out with her canvas backpack against her chest. The cold took the shape of water and went straight through the knees of her jeans. The road was empty. The fire station's brick face looked darker in the sleet, almost purple where old soot had settled into the mortar. Mara crossed quickly, boots slipping on the grit near the curb. She did not go to the front doors. Even in desperation, some habits held. Front doors belonged to people who had permission. Along the side wall, half hidden behind a trash-choked lilac bush, she found a narrow service door with a padlock hanging open through the hasp. The wood around the jamb had swollen and split. Mara touched the lock first, then the door, as if the building might object. "I'm not taking anything," she whispered. The door gave with a wet groan. Inside, the air was colder than the car, but still. That mattered. No wind moved against her face. Her flashlight caught a strip of concrete floor, a collapsed cardboard box, and the lower curve of a red-painted hose rack bolted to the wall. The station smelled of dust, iron, damp, brick, and the faint old bitterness of motor oil. Mara stepped in and closed the door behind her until only a finger width of gray light showed at the edge. Her first thought was practical: find a place where no ceiling plaster could fall. Her second was stranger. The building did not feel abandoned the way an empty storefront felt abandoned. It felt interrupted. The apparatus bay opened wide in front of her, broad enough for 2 engines that were long gone. Oil stains darkened the concrete in patient ovals. A shallow drain ran down the center line, clogged with leaves and grit. On the right wall, iron hooks still held scraps of turnout. Gear labels, the names peeled away by water and time. Above them, a wooden sign with blistered gold letters read, "Briar Glen Volunteer Fire Company No. 2. Mara aimed her light at the ceiling. Pressed metal panels had rusted along the seams. One corner near the front showed a brown water stain as large as a bedsheet. She moved away from it. At the rear of the bay stairs climbed toward a second floor. Beside them stood a watch desk with one missing drawer and a green-shaded lamp whose cord had been cut cleanly near the plug. A black, rotary phone sat on the desk, its receiver resting slightly crooked as if someone had set it down in the middle of a sentence. Mara did not touch the phone. She had spent the last 6 years caring for her mother in rented rooms and borrowed kitchens. She knew the difference between dirt and neglect. Dirt could happen in a week. Neglect took time, and 1,000 small decisions made by people who had stopped expecting anything to return. The station had both, but beneath them was order tools, once hung by size boots, once lined heel-to-wall schedules, once pinned where tired men could see them in a hurry. Her mother would have noticed that. Her mother, who could make soup from a heel of onion, and 2 potatoes, who folded even worn towels as if guests might arrive. Mara swallowed hard and turned toward the bay doors. The left door had dropped on its track. Sleet pressed through a gap near the bottom and made a silver line on the floor. She found an old push broom under the stairs and swept leaves away from the drain, not because anyone had asked, but because standing still made the cold more intimate. The broom handle was rough and a splinter slid into the base of her thumb. She pulled it out with her teeth and kept sweeping. When she finished, the water had somewhere to go. That small success embarrassed her. She leaned on the broom and laughed once without sound. A car passed outside, its headlights washing across the cracked front windows. Mara froze. The light moved over the hose rack, the watch desk, the hanging hooks, then slipped away. No brakes, no voices. Only sleet and the low rush of tires on wet pavement. She carried her backpack to the inner wall where the hose rack cast a crooked shadow. The concrete there was dry. A row of old canvas hose couplings lay in a wooden crate nearby, greened with age. She set the crate between herself and the open bay, like it could serve as a boundary. Then she took out everything she owned that could help one: a spare sweater, a cracked phone with 14% battery, a bottle of water, a paper bag holding half a biscuit from lunch, and the red scarf. The scarf still smelled faintly of lavender drawer soap, though Mara knew that was memory more than fact. She wrapped it around her neck twice and tucked the ends inside her coat. Upstairs something ticked. Mara lifted her head. The sound came again, soft and spaced tick, then nothing, then a wooden creak as the wind leaned into the tower. Old buildings moved, pipes cooled, water found nails. She knew enough not to make stories out of ordinary sounds. Still, she waited, eyes fixed on the dark square at the top of the stairs. Nothing came down. She checked the breaker box mounted near the rear door. Every switch was down. A paper inspection tag from 2019 hung on a wire curled by damp. The power meter outside, seen through the dirty window, had no glass face at all. Whatever the station had been, it was dead now in the official ways that mattered. Mara returned to the drywall and lowered herself onto the concrete. Her knees hurt when they bent. She used the spare sweater as a cushion under one hip and pulled the coat over her legs. The cold from the floor rose through the fabric at once, but the wind could not reach her, and after 3 nights in the car, that felt almost kind. Her phone screen lit when she touched it. No new messages, no missed calls. She opened the last voicemail from her mother by accident or by habit and closed it before the first word played. The sound of that voice in this place would undo her, and she could not afford to be undone where she might need to run. Instead, she watched the high front windows collect the faint orange of the streetlight. The rusted alarm bell outside hung beyond the glass, a black half-moon under the eave. Below it, painted letters had faded into the brick answer with courage. Mara looked away. She had never thought of herself as brave. Careful, maybe. Useful when there was a prescription to pick up or a form to complete. Good at making small amounts stretch. Good at sitting beside a hospital bed without crying until the curtain was pulled. Bravery seemed like something for people who ran toward sirens. Her stomach tightened around the biscuit. She ate half of it slowly, saving the rest because morning was a country she still had to reach. Then she tucked her backpack under her head and lay on her side beside the cracked hose rack. The building settled around her. Sleet brushed the bay doors. Water clicked somewhere into a metal pail she had not seen. Far off, a truck shifted gears on the county road and faded into the hills. Mara closed her eyes. For a while, sleep came in broken pieces. She dreamed of steam on diner windows, of her mother's hand smoothing a red scarf over a chairback of a room she had paid for by the week and lost by the month. Each time she woke, the station remained brick-iron concrete darkness. She began to trust its shape. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the old alarm bell struck once. One clean note rolled through the apparatus bay deep enough to tremble in the concrete under her shoulder. Mara sat upright so fast her coat slid to the floor. Her breath stopped in her throat. The sound faded into the rafters, leaving every hook and crate and dark doorway listening with her. Outside, the sleet kept falling. The breaker box was dead, the station was empty, and above the front doors, the old bell had answered something. Mara did not move until the last vibration left the concrete. Her hand found the flashlight before her mind found any explanation. The beam shook across the bay doors, the drain trench, the hooks, the watch desk, and finally the breaker box with every switch still hanging down like broken teeth. She forced herself to stand. Her knees had gone stiff from the floor, and the cold made the first steps awkward. "Hello," she called. The word came back thin from the pressed metal ceiling. No footsteps answered, no second bell. Only sleet tapping the front windows and water ticking steadily into some unseen bucket behind the stairs. Mara went first to the bay doors. The old alarm bell hung outside under its bracket, visible through the high glass if she stood on the cracked wooden crate. It was still. She waited with her breath held, watching for a sway. A loose chain, any ordinary movement that could shrink the sound back down to size. Nothing moved except the sleet silvering past the streetlight. She climbed down and crossed to the breaker box. The inspection tag brushed her knuckles. She opened the panel again and shone the light inside. Dust lay clean across the switches. No fresh mark, no heat, no smell of burned wire. The conduit that once ran up the wall had been painted brick red, then forgotten. She followed it with the flashlight until it disappeared into the ceiling above the watch desk. Old systems could do strange things. Her mother used to say every building had one noise it saved for strangers. Mara tried to believe that while she packed her backpack with stiff fingers. Leaving would have been sensible. The car was colder, but it was hers. It had doors that locked, and windows she understood. Yet when she reached the side exit, the wind pushed sleet through the split jamb and struck her face hard enough to make her step back. The station, for all its dead wires and impossible bell, was still a box around her body. She stayed awake until the front windows began to pale. At dawn, the storm thinned to a cold mist. Mara folded the red scarf, tucked it into her coat, and used the broom again this time. Less from fear than from the need to leave no proof of herself except improvement. She swept the leaves she had missed toward the drain. She picked up 3 pieces of glass near the watch desk and wrapped them in an old newspaper from beneath the stairs. When daylight reached the rear wall, she saw the source of the water, a ceiling, cm above the stair landing, where a slow drip fell into a rusted coffee can someone had placed there years before. The can was full. Mara emptied it outside behind the lilac bush, then stood in the alley with the cold mist touching her face. From there, she could see the hose tower, better narrow brick with louvered vents near the top and a patched roof cap that leaned slightly toward the street. The tower looked less like a mystery in daylight and more like a repair no one had wanted to price. She should have walked away then. Instead, she crossed to the municipal building when its lights came on. Inside, the lobby smelled of wet coats, copier, toner, and burned coffee. A corkboard near the entrance held notices for leaf pickup, a church supper, a missing tabby, and a town auction scheduled for December 18th. The fire station was listed on the second-page parcel 11B surplus municipal structure, unsafe interior, access prohibited. Mara read the line twice. Behind the counter, an older woman in a plum cardigan was sorting envelopes into wire trays. Her white hair was pinned with 2 black combs. She had seen Mara the day before outside the same building, and this time her eyes paused on the canvas backpack, the damp cuffs of Mara's jeans, the work boots leaving dark prints on the linoleum. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Mara almost said no. No was safer. No kept questions from breeding. "There's a leak in the old fire station," she said. Her voice sounded rough from the cold. "Above the back stairs, the can under it is full. If it overflows, it'll run down into the wall." The woman stopped sorting. "You were inside." Mara looked at the counter. There was a small brass nameplate near the computer, Clara DeWitt. "The side door doesn't latch," Mara said. "The padlock is open. I didn't take anything." Clara studied her for a long moment. Not cruelly. That almost made it harder. "You slept there," she said. Mara's face heated despite the cold in her clothes. "I swept the bay." A corner of Clara's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "That wasn't the question." "No, ma'am." Clara set the envelopes down and came around the counter slowly, one hand resting against her lower back. She was small, but she had the stillness of someone who had answered phones during bad nights and learned not to waste motion. "You eat breakfast." Mara shook her head before pride could stop her. Clara disappeared into a side office and returned with a stainless thermos and a paper napkin wrapped around 2 pieces of buttered toast. She placed them on the counter between them. "That station has been empty since the county consolidated service," Clara said. "Town keeps saying it'll do something with it. Mostly it pays insurance and waits for weather to make the decision cheaper. I can leave." "I know you can." Clara looked toward the window where the fire station's bell was just visible beyond the sycamores. "But you came here to report damage." Mara held the warm thermos with both hands. The heat reached the bones of her fingers so quickly that her eyes stung. "The bell rang last night," she said. Clara's expression changed before she controlled it. "Which bell?" "The one over the bay doors, once. Around 2 in the morning. There's no power." "No," Clara said quietly. "There isn't. You know what would cause it." Clara looked back at the envelopes on the counter as if their order mattered suddenly. "Old buildings complain in weather." It didn't sound like a complaint. For a moment, the lobby seemed to hold still around them. Then a door opened down the hall, and a man with a tie loosened under his collar stepped out carrying a stack of permit folders. Clara straightened. "Mr. Larkin," she said, "the station side door is unsecured and the roof leak above the rear stair has worsened. This young woman reported it." The man looked at Mara with the weary caution of a public official who had already spent money he did not have. "You went inside posted property." "Yes, sir," Mara said. "I was cold." The answer landed plainly. It left no room for decoration. Mr. Larkin rubbed one eyebrow. "Clara." "I'm not suggesting we ignore liability," Clara said. "I'm suggesting we reduce it. Until Public Works can board the door properly, someone needs eyes on the place. The auction is 3 weeks out. We still have the temporary caretaker form from the depot project." That was different. It was also cheaper than replacing copper after thieves found it. Mara opened her mouth, then closed it. She had not expected anyone to argue her into usefulness. Mr. Larkin looked from Clara to Mara. "You have ID." Mara did. The address on it belonged to a room she no longer had. She slid it across the counter anyway. 20 minutes later, she signed a 1-page temporary access agreement that allowed her to enter the fire station during daylight hours to monitor leaks, secure doors, remove loose debris, and report hazards. Clara watched her read every line. When Mara hesitated at the clause about no overnight occupancy, Clara tapped the paper once. "Daylight," she said. "That is what this says." "I understand." Clara's eyes held hers. "And if weather turns dangerous, the church basement opens at 7. You come here first if you need the number." It was not permission to sleep there. It was not exactly refusal, either. It was the narrow ledge between rules and mercy. Clara handed over a key, tagged "Station Side" in faded marker, and a second paper with emergency contacts. You don't climb the tower alone. You don't touch wiring. You don't force any locked interior door. You see mold animals or a sagging roofline, you step out and call. "Yes, ma'am." "And Mara." She looked up. The station used to be where people came before they knew who else to ask. Clara tightened the cap on the thermos and pushed it toward her. "That doesn't mean it's safe. It means you treat it with respect." The key felt heavier than it should have. By late morning, Mara was back at the side door with a town-issued trash bag, a pair of borrowed work gloves, and toast warming her stomach like a small coal. The mist had stopped. Water dripped from the bay door tracks. In daylight, the station showed all its injuries without drama. The cracked glass, the rust blooms under the bell bracket, the warped trim, the weeds splitting the concrete apron. She unlocked the side door legally this time. The difference was quiet but enormous. Inside, she opened the rear windows an inch, where the frames allowed it enough to move the damp air, but not invite weather. She carried the full coffee can down the stairs and set a plastic storage tub under the leak. She photographed the ceiling seam with her phone for the town file. Then she turned toward the watch desk. The black rotary phone sat unchanged. The cut cord lay behind it like a dead tail. Above the desk, a narrow wooden board held old alarm labels beneath cloudy plastic Main Street, Mill Road, School North Ridge, River Bridge. Each label had a small brass peg below it. A red pull handle hung at the far right stiff with dust. Mara did not pull it. She shone the light upward. The painted conduit rose from the board into the ceiling. Somewhere above that ceiling was the route to the bell. By afternoon, she had filled 2 trash bags with broken glass, wet cardboard, and plastic bottles tossed in by teenagers or wind. She left anything historical where it was hose couplings, helmets, too, cracked to wear a wooden clipboard, a dented brass nozzle under the bench. Those belonged to the station until someone who knew better decided otherwise. At 4, Clara arrived carrying a clipboard and a ring of older keys. "You found the drip," she said, "and a second one starting over the bay door." Clara made a note. Her handwriting was small and square. Mara hesitated. "Were you a firefighter?" "Dispatcher," Clara said. "Back when the county calls came through a switchboard and half the volunteers beat the siren here in their own trucks." She touched the watch desk with 2 fingers, then removed them as if surprised by the dust. "I sat there some nights when weather knocked the phone lines mean." "Did the bell ever ring by itself?" Clara looked at the alarm board. "Not that I heard. But you thought of something this morning." "I thought of old men who fixed things with baling wire and never wrote down how." Clara lifted one key, then let it fall back against the ring. That bell was mechanical before anything was electrical. Poles, cables, relays, whatever somebody could afford. If it rang, there's a reason. The words steadied Mara more than comfort would have. Together, they checked the obvious places without touching what Clara called anything that might still bite. The breaker stayed dead. The front pull handle did not move. The bay door chains were rusted but separate from the bell. In the rear stairwell, wind breathed down from the hose tower with a hollow pipe-like sound. Clara locked the interior tower door before leaving. "Not alone," she said. After she was gone, Mara stood in the apparatus bay with the side key in her pocket and the thermos empty on the watch desk. The light was thinning. The agreement said daylight, and daylight was nearly spent. She swept one last strip of concrete near the hose rack, folded her spare sweater into the backpack, and checked the storage tub under the leak. Then she locked the side door from the outside and stood under the small overhang while cold evening gathered around the station. Mara crossed to her car, started it long enough to hear the engine turn over, and sat behind the wheel without closing the door. The church basement would open soon. The thought of fluorescent lights and folding cots made her tired in a different way. Across the street, the fire station's brick held the last gray of the sky. She had a legal key now. Not permission for the night. Not a home, but a key. Rain began again light and steady, tapping the roof of the hatchback and the old hose tower in the same uneven rhythm. Mara closed the car door, held the key in her palm until its teeth marked her skin, and looked at the dark station that had rung once with no power and no one inside. By 8 the next morning, Mara had borrowed a flashlight with a stronger beam from the mechanic 2 doors down from the gas station and bought a 99-cent notebook from the pharmacy with coins counted twice in her palm. She wrote "Station Check" across the first page because naming a task made it less frightening. Under it, she drew a crooked square for the apparatus bay, a narrow rectangle for the rear stairs, and a tall box for the hose tower she had not yet entered. The rain had stopped, but the cold had sharpened. It made the station's bricks look clean at the edges and turned every puddle on the concrete apron into gray glass. Mara unlocked the side door, pushed it open with her shoulder, and listened before stepping inside. Nothing answered. The storage tub under the stair leak was half full. She emptied it, photographed the ceiling seam again, and set the tub back with a broken brick beside it so no one would kick it aside in the dark. Then she stood in front of the watch desk with her notebook open and looked at the alarm board as if it were a sentence written in a language she could almost read. Main Street, Mill Road, School, North Ridge, River Bridge. The brass pegs below the labels were tarnished to brown. The red pull handle at the right side sat in a metal guide, its paint worn where hands had gripped it years ago. Mara crouched beneath the desk and followed the lower conduit with the flashlight. It ran behind the baseboard, turned upward, and disappeared into a boxed channel in the wall. Dust lay thick along the top of the box, unbroken except for one place where a fine black line showed. She touched the line with one gloved finger. Grit came away. At 10, Clara arrived wearing a tan raincoat and carrying a canvas tool bag that looked older than Mara. She held it close to her hip, careful with the weight. "I brought things for looking," Clara said, "not for fixing." Inside were a tape measure, painter's tape, a small mirror on a telescoping handle, a screwdriver with a cracked yellow handle, and 2 dust masks still in their paper sleeve. "I thought you said not to touch anything that might bite." "I did." Clara handed her a mask. "Today we identify the teeth." They began with the tower door. Clara tried 3 keys before one turned. The lock resisted, then released with a dry click. The door opened inward on a stairwell so narrow Mara had to angle her shoulders to see up it. Cold air poured down, smelling of damp wood-bird dust and old rope. "No climbing ahead of me," Clara said. Mara nodded, though. Clara's knees moved slowly on the first steps and her hand tightened on the rail. The staircase rose along the inside of the tower in short flights. On the first landing, a faded coil of canvas hose lay stiff as bark. On the second, sunlight pushed through a broken louver and striped the wall. The wind found the slats and made them hum. Halfway up, Mara heard it, a faint metallic shift, not a ring, but the beginning of one. Clara stopped at once. There, Mara whispered. Above them something dragged lightly against metal. They climbed 3 more steps. Near the top of the tower, behind a square access panel that had lost 2 screws, a cable descended through an iron guide. It was not electrical wire. It was old braided steel, dark with grease and rust, connected to a small counterweight that hung inside a narrow wooden chase. The weight should have rested still, but wind pushed through the warped louver in irregular breaths. Each strong gust moved the loose cable just enough to lift and drop the weight a fraction of an inch. Clara leaned close without touching it. That would travel forward, to the bell, maybe, or to whatever used to strike it. Mara shone the flashlight into the chase. The cable disappeared downward, not straight to the front, but into the wall cavity toward the watchroom. Along the side of the wood, the counterweight had worn a shiny groove through old paint. Near the bottom of that groove, fresh dust had fallen in a crescent. It moved recently, Mara said. Wind last night was hard from the east. Clara looked at the louver. One slat had split loose at the bottom. If that piece caught the cable right, it could pull, then let go. That explains the bell. It explains a bell, Clara said. Not why anyone built it like this. Mara liked that about her. Clara did not use mystery as a blanket. She kept pulling it back to see the floor. They marked the loose cable with painter's tape, took pictures, and went back down slower than they had climbed. In the apparatus bay, the light had shifted through the front windows. It fell across the watch desk and the alarm board, catching dust on the brass pegs. Mara stood there with the tower still in her legs, feeling the path of the cable above her, as if she could see through plaster and brick. If it comes down here, she said, there should be movement somewhere. Clara set the tool bag on the desk. Old call boards had all kinds of homemade additions. Buzzers, bells, drop cards, indicator flags. This place never had money for clean replacements. Men like Jonah Reed kept things working with spare parts and stubbornness. Jonah Reed, Captain Reed, long before my time as dispatcher, but his name stayed in the walls. Clara brushed dust from the desk edge with her sleeve. My father said he could fix a pump with fence wire and a prayer, then charge you only for the wire. Mara looked back at the alarm board. Was he the captain when this was built, when it was rebuilt after the 1957 roof fire? The front wall is older. The tower and watchroom were his era. The name settled into the room. Jonah Reed. Mara wrote it in the notebook. They tested only what could be tested without force. Clara stood near the tower door while Mara watched the alarm board. A gust came through the upper vents and traveled down the building as a hollow breath. Nothing happened. Another gust. The faintest tremor moved through the red pull handle, too small to ring a bell large enough to prove connection. Mara crouched. The black line behind the box channel seemed clearer now. She aimed the flashlight along the base of the alarm board and saw 4 screws, 3 painted over one with the paint chipped clean from its slot. "Someone opened this," she said. Clara bent beside her with a small sound from her knees. "Recently, no, but after it was painted." The alarm board itself was fixed to the wall above the watch desk. But the lower trim below it looked different from the rest. Oak instead of pine, darker stain, better fitted. Mara ran her gloved fingers along the seam. At the right end beneath the red pull handle, her finger dipped into a shallow notch. Not damage, a finger hold. Clara's face had gone still. "We said no forcing," Mara reminded her. "That is not forcing," Clara said. "That is asking properly." Mara inserted the screwdriver into the one screw with the clean slot and turned. It resisted, then gave with a soft crack of old paint. The second screw took longer. Clara held the mirror low to see whether anything behind the trim shifted. When the last screw came loose, the strip of oak did not fall. It stayed in place until Mara pressed the notch and slid it half an inch to the left. Inside the wall, something clicked. Above them, from the direction of the tower, Chase the counterweight dropped with a muted thud. The alarm board moved outward the width of Mara's thumb. Neither woman spoke. Mara set the screwdriver down carefully as if sound might close the wall again. She placed both hands on the sides of the board and pulled. Dust sifted from the top edge. The old labels trembled. The board opened on hidden brass hinges no larger than book hardware, revealing a narrow compartment built between studs. For a moment, the discovery was only darkness. Then the flashlight found canvas. A black roll lay inside, tied with red thread that had faded almost pink. Beside it sat a small roster card yellowed at the corners and a brass key on a paper tag. The tag had been protected from light well enough that Mara could still read the careful block letters. Lamp Fund. Clara put one hand on the watch desk. "Oh," she said so softly Mara almost missed it. Mara did not reach in. The instinct to grab, to prove, to secure rose in her body and met something steadier. This place had kept its object for years. It could wait one more breath. "What is the lamp fund?" she asked. Clara's eyes stayed on the key. "I don't know." But she said it like someone who had found a word from a dream. The roster card came first because it sat loose near the front. Mara lifted it by the edges. Paper felt dry and fragile through her gloves. Across the top, in blue ink browned by time, someone had written Briar Glen Volunteer Fire Company No. 2 Winter Duty. Under it were names in 2 columns. Some had check marks, some had small stars. At the bottom, in a different hand, was a line Mara read twice. "A bell is only useful if someone answers." Clara inhaled sharply. "You know that line? My father used to say it when the phone rang during supper." Her mouth tightened. "I thought it was just something firemen said." Mara laid the card on the watch desk away from the damp ring where the thermos had been. The brass key came next. It was small, with a hollow barrel and 2 flat teeth, not a door key. The paper tag was tied with the same red thread as the canvas roll. On the back, nearly hidden by age, someone had written, "Watch Lamp Box." "Do you have a lamp box?" Mara asked. "Not that I know of." They both looked around the watchroom. The green-shaded desk lamp with the cut cord sat in plain sight, but its base was too new for the key. A shelf above the desk held old binders, a cracked mug full of pencils, and a framed photograph turned face down beneath dust. Mara lifted the photograph. 5 men and 2 women stood in front of the station bay doors sometime in the 1970s, their coats buttoned, their faces stern against winter sun. One woman near the end had Clara's eyes. "My Aunt Ruth," Clara said before Mara could ask. She ran calls before people liked saying women did. The canvas roll remained in the compartment. "We should take it to the office," Mara said. "Yes." Clara's answer came quickly, then softened. "But maybe we look enough to know whether it needs a dry box first." Mara reached in with both hands and lifted the roll. It was heavier than cloth alone, but not by much. No coins shifted. No hard edges struck together. Whatever it held was flat, flexible, and patient. They cleared the watch desk. Clara spread an old cotton towel from her bag, then stopped and looked at Mara. "You found it," she said. "The bell found it." "No." Clara's voice was firmer than before. "You listened and you checked." Mara did not know what to do with that, so she untied the red thread. The knot loosened after one careful tug. The canvas relaxed, showing the edge of a ledger, dark green, and several envelopes bound with another length of thread. On top lay a folded sheet with Captain Jonah Reed written across it in a steady hand. Mara's thumb hovered over the fold. Clara covered the paper gently with her palm. "Not here," she said. "Not until we can keep the pages flat and dry." Mara nodded. She was grateful for the rule. Rules had failed her in many places, but this one protected something that had no voice. They wrapped the canvas again not as tightly as before, and left the roster card and key on top of it for the town clerk to see. Clara took photographs from 3 angles. Mara wrote the time in her notebook, 11:42 a.m. Hidden compartment behind alarm, board opened after tower counterweight lowered, contents intact. When she finished, her handwriting looked calmer than she felt. The station around them seemed different now, though nothing had changed. The bay doors still sagged. The roof still leaked. The tower still breathed cold air down its narrow stairs. But the building was no longer only empty. It had been keeping account. Clara lifted the canvas roll with both hands. Mara looked once more at the open compartment. In its back wall, the cable chase continued downward, and at the bottom a small iron lever rested where the counterweight had released it. The bell had not rung from magic or madness or mercy. Wind had moved a broken louver. The louver had moved a cable. The cable had lowered a weight. The weight had unlocked a board. But the timing still left her quiet. She closed the alarm board carefully until the hidden hinges accepted it. Clara gathered the photographs. Together, they laid the black canvas roll on the watch desk, the red thread loose beside it, while pale daylight crossed the old roster card and caught on the brass key marked Lamp Fund. Clara cleared the municipal conference table with the side of her forearm, moving budget folders, a stapler, and a plastic bowl of peppermint candies to the windowsill. Mara stood with the canvas roll held against her coat, afraid that if she set it down too quickly, the years inside it might scatter. "Here," Clara said. She spread 2 clean towels across the table, then placed a sheet of copy paper at each corner, like the beginning of an examination. The room had no ceremony in it. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A coffee maker clicked in the hallway. Through the blinds, the old fire station sat across the street with its bay doors shut and its bell dark under the eave. That plainness helped. It made the discovery smaller, something 2 women could handle with dry hands and patience. Mara laid the canvas roll on the towels. The red thread had loosened during the walk over, so she untied it without pulling hard. Clara put on reading glasses, lifted the roster card first, and read the names under her breath. Reed, Donnelly, Voss, Whitaker, Bell, Morrow. Her finger stopped near the bottom, Ruth DeWitt. "Your aunt." Clara nodded once. She never let anyone call her Brave. Said Brave was what people named you afterwards, so they didn't have to talk about the work. Mara thought of the painted words on the brick answer with courage. She looked down at the card instead of answering. The canvas opened in 3 folds. Inside lay the green ledger, 6 envelopes tied with cotton string, a bank book with a cracked black cover, and the folded sheet marked Captain Jonah Reed. Clara slid a blank sheet beneath the folded paper before lifting it, keeping the old crease supported. The page made a dry whisper when it opened. The handwriting was steady dark blue and formal in the way of people who expected paper to last. Clara read the first line aloud, then stopped. "To whoever answers after us." The room seemed to narrow around the table. Mara rested her hands at her sides. She did not touch the paper. She watched Clara's eyes move, watched the older woman's mouth tighten and soften as each sentence found her. Captain Reed had written after the roof fire of 1957, when half the station had been rebuilt with volunteer labor and donated brick. He wrote that a fire company was not only a truck, a siren, or a roster of men fit enough to carry hose. It was a promise made before trouble chose a house. He wrote that flames did not end when water knocked them down. Families stood afterward in yards with wet shoes, burned coats, no supper, no bed, and children too tired to cry. So the volunteers had started keeping a lamp in the watchroom window on storm nights. At first it meant coffee and a phone call. Then it meant blankets, coal medicine, a room over the feed store, A ride to a sister in Fairmont, 3 days rent baby formula, a repaired furnace valve. No speeches, no announcements, no plaques. They called it the Lamp Fund, Clara said. Her voice had changed. It had lost the clerk's tidy edge. Mara looked at the little brass key on the table. Where did the money come from? Clara opened the ledger. The first pages were columns ruled by hand. Dates, names, amounts, initials. $5 from a pancake breakfast. $12 from a church supper. $3.20 from a jar labeled coffee. Though someone had written beside it, Jonah says, no one pays for bad coffee twice. Larger entries came later. Over time returned a timber mill donation after a chimney fire, anonymous envelopes left through the bay door slot. The withdrawals were more careful than the deposits. Coal delivery Widow Parsons, January 1961. Room above Miller's feed Harlan family, 2 nights. Shoes for L. Baird children after Main Street fire. Bus fare E. Cullen and infant to sister's house. Medication paid, cash receipt sealed. No entry used more words than necessary. The restraint gave the pages weight. Mara had seen ledgers before, mostly bills and payment plans and hospital balances that made a person feel reduced to a number. This one did the opposite. It recorded need without stripping dignity. It made help look practical, quiet, and exact. Clara opened one envelope. Inside were receipts clipped around a note in a woman's hand thanking the station men and Miss Ruth for leaving blankets on the porch instead of knocking. Another envelope held 2 photographs, a family of 4 standing in front of a replacement stove, and a little boy in oversized boots beside a fire engine tire. On the back, someone had written, "He slept through the night." Mara turned away for a moment. "You all right?" Clara asked. "It was not a lie, only incomplete." The next envelope held no photograph, just a list of addresses checked during a February freeze. The last line read, "If the bay is dry and the stove is safe, keep room for one more." Mr. Larkin came in during the third envelope and stopped with one hand still on the doorframe. He looked first at the documents, then at Clara, then at Mara. Whatever he had meant to say about liability or procedure did not survive the sight of Captain Reed's page beneath the fluorescent lights. "What is this?" he asked. "A problem," Clara said. "The kind worth having." They showed him the ledger, the key tag, the photographs on Mara's phone of the alarm board compartment. Clara explained the cable, the counterweight, the board opening only when the striker weight dropped. Mr. Larkin listened with his tie crooked and his folders hanging at his side. "There's an auction notice already posted," he said, but the sentence had no force behind it. "Not sold yet," Clara replied. He rubbed one hand over his face. "We can't run a shelter out of an unsafe building because an old ledger makes us feel bad," Mara said. Both of them looked at her. Her voice came out quieter than she expected, but it held. "You can't. But you can stop it from getting worse until someone knows what's possible. The roof leak above the stairs is active. The side door doesn't latch unless you lift it. The bay drain is blocked halfway down. If the town waits 3 more weeks, buyers will say demolition is the only sensible bid." Mr. Larkin studied her. "And you know this because you spent 1 night there." "I know it because I had nowhere else to look." Clara's eyes dropped to the ledger, but she said nothing. The bank book was the last item. Its pages were brittle at the corners, stamped by a local bank that had merged twice since the address on the cover. The balance in the final entry was not large enough to save a building. It was not even large enough to replace a roof. But it was not nothing, and it had a name attached to it that had survived dust water consolidation and neglect. Station Lamp Fund. Mr. Larkin photographed the page and said he would call the successor bank. He said it like a man giving himself a task so he would not have to name the feeling in the room. Clara refolded Captain Reed's sheet only along its old crease. Before placing it back into the canvas, she read the final paragraph aloud. "If there comes a year when no company rolls from these doors, let the lamp not go out for that reason alone. A bell is only useful if someone answers. If this house still has a roof, let it keep one corner warm for the burned out, the frozen out, and the ones ashamed to ask." Mara looked through the blinds toward the station. The phrase "burned out" did not stay on the page. It moved through her coat under her scarf into the private place where she kept the facts of her life separated so they would not crush her all at once. Burned out did not only mean fire. Frozen out did not only mean weather. Ashamed to ask did not need explaining. Clara closed the ledger. "We need a dry box," Mara said. "We need several," Clara answered, "and acid-free folders if this town can rise to the cost of being decent." Mr. Larkin gave a tired breath that might have become a laugh in another room. "I'll find something from the records closet for today." They carried the documents back across the street before noon, because Clara insisted the hidden compartment should not be left standing open in a public building, and Mara insisted the watchroom was drier than the municipal basement archive. Mr. Larkin came with them bringing 2 plastic document bins and a roll of evidence tape from the police cabinet. Though he looked faintly embarrassed by the word evidence, inside the station the air had cooled further. Mara set the storage tub under the leak more squarely and checked that no splash had reached the desk. Clara placed the ledger in the first bin, the envelopes in the second, and Captain Reed's page on top in a paper sleeve. They did not put the cash back behind the alarm board. Not yet. Clara locked the bins in a metal cabinet in the watchroom after Mara lined its shelf with a dry towel. Mr. Larkin wrote the cabinet number in his folder. Outside clouds thickened over the sycamores. The first flakes began while Mara was cleaning dust from the watch desk with a damp rag. They drifted past the front windows without urgency, small and widely spaced, disappearing when they touched the concrete apron. Clara stood beside the bay doors and watched them fall. "This station took calls for 48 years, she said. "I answered phones for 12 of them. After county dispatch, Mara wrung the rag into a bucket. The water turned gray. Maybe some stories were waiting for someone who needed them differently." Clara looked at her then, and this time did not look away from the backpack, the worn boots, or the scarf tucked tight at Mara's throat. "Maybe," she said. By mid-afternoon, snow gathered in the cracks outside the bay doors. The old bell did not ring again. It hung silent above the brick face while Mara slid the cleaned ledger towel into place, set the black canvas roll beside the locked cabinet, and watched the storm slowly erase her footprints from the station apron. The next morning, Mara carried the first plastic document bin back across the street with both arms wrapped around it, not because it was heavy, but because the wind kept trying to pry the lid loose. Clara walked beside her, with Captain Reed's folded sheet inside a paper sleeve pressed flat against a clipboard. Mr. Larkin met them at the municipal counter with his coat still on and a look that said he had slept badly beside numbers. "I called the bank," he said. "They can trace the old account, but not today." Clara set the clipboard down. "Then today we ask for time." The town office had no grand chamber, only a meeting room with stackable chairs and a framed map of Mercer County. By noon, 5 people had gathered: Mr. Larkin, Clara the mayor, a public works foreman named Denny Pike, and a councilwoman who kept her gloves on while she listened. Mara stood near the wall because every chair felt like a place meant for someone with an address. Clara read only enough of Captain Reed's covenant to make the room understand its shape. She did not make a performance of it. The ledger pages did the heavier work. Coal, rent, medicine, 2 nights over the feed store. Names spoken softly, then covered again. Denny Pike scratched his jaw with a carpenter's pencil. "Ledger or no ledger, that roof edge is bad." "I know," Mara said. Everyone turned toward her. She opened her notebook to the page where she had listed the station's injuries. Active leak over rear stairs. Smaller leak near bay door track. Side door has to be lifted to latch. Bay drain is blocked past the first cleanout. 1 stair tread to the tower flexes. Front left bay door has dropped maybe 1.5 inches. Denny looked at Mr. Larkin. "She's not wrong." The mayor leaned back. "We cannot cancel a posted auction because an abandoned building has sentimental value." "It was never abandoned by accident," Clara said. "It was put down and forgotten." Mara kept her eyes on the notebook. "I'm not asking you to restore it. Just don't sell it before you know what it is." Silence followed, not warm but not closed. By the end of the hour, the auction was not canceled. That would have taken votes, notices, and courage no one had yet admitted to having. But the councilwoman moved to request a 30-day safety assessment and preservation review. Mr. Larkin agreed to pause any interior showings. Denny agreed to walk the building that afternoon. When they left the room, Clara touched Mara's sleeve with 2 fingers. "You did fine." Mara looked through the lobby window toward the station. "Fine doesn't hold a roof," no, Clara said, "but it can get a ladder." Denny arrived at 2 with a hard hat, a moisture meter, a folding ladder, and the patient suspicion of a man who trusted rot more than optimism. He made Mara wait outside while he checked the apparatus bay ceiling. Then he waved her and Clara in only as far as the watch desk. "No heroics," he said. "If I tell you to step back, you step back." "Yes, sir," Mara answered. He pressed the moisture meter against the stained plaster above the rear stairs. The little screen flashed and his mouth bent down. At the bay door, he scraped a screwdriver along the track and knocked loose a strip of rust the length of a finger. He crouched by the drain, lifted the iron grate with a pry bar, and found a mat of leaves grit and something that might once have been a work glove. "That drain backs up and a freeze water comes under the doors and this floor turns into a rink," he said. Mara wrote it down. Upstairs, he allowed her only to stand on the landing while he tested each tread. The 3rd step below the hose tower door flexed under his boot and gave a small dry crack. "That one gets blocked today." He stretched yellow caution tape across the stairwell and wrote, "No tower access" on a piece of cardboard torn from a supply box. Mara felt the loss more sharply than she expected. The tower had frightened her, but it had also answered. Denny checked the roof from the outside ladder feet, biting into muddy gravel. Mara held the ladder because he told her to hands tight around the cold aluminum rails. Snowmelt dripped from the gutter onto her sleeve. From below, she could see where flashing had lifted along the tower seam and where ivy had trapped wet leaves against the brick. 30 days won't save this place," Denny called down. Clara's face tightened. "But 30 days can keep it from getting worse," he added. "If people do exactly the unromantic things first." He came down with a list: clear drain tarp and temporary flashing over the worst roof edge brace, the bad stairboard, cracked windows from inside repair, the side latch, keep documents off exterior walls, no public entry, no tower work without a second person in daylight. Mara wrote until her fingers cramped. Denny looked at her notebook. "You planning to run a fire station?" "No." "What then?" She looked through the open bay toward the watchroom where the green-shaded lamp sat dead beside the locked cabinet. "Keep one corner dry long enough for someone better to decide." Denny studied her, then handed her the carpenter's pencil. "Start with the drain. Don't put your bare hand in anything you can't see." The drain took 3 hours and all of Mara's patience. She used a bent piece of wire, a cracked dustpan, and a bucket Denny left behind. Each scoop came up black and sour with rotted leaves. Twice she gagged and had to stand near the side door until cold air cleared her throat. Under the sludge, she found bottle caps, cigarette filters, a rusted bolt, and the missing brass tip from an old hose nozzle. She set the nozzle tip on the watch desk instead of throwing it away. When water finally ran from the first clean-out to the outside trench, the sound was small but clean. Mara poured half a bucket through to test it and watched the stream carry grit into the yard. The apparatus bay looked worse before it looked better. Clearing one corner exposed the scale of the rest. The old hose rack was split at its base. The locker bench had collapsed inward where water had softened the legs. A family of mice had shredded a stack of training forms behind a metal cabinet, and Mara spent 20 minutes carrying the ruined paper out with a dust mask tight against her face. She did not sleep in the station that night. The church basement opened at 7, and Clara drove her there without asking whether she wanted a ride. Mara lay on a folding cot under fluorescent lights, listening to someone cough behind a curtain partition, and missed the station's dry wall with a homesickness that made no sense. The next morning she returned before the office opened. Frost silvered the apron. Her footprints from the day before had hardened into shallow marks. She set up the watchroom as a work corner, not a bedroom. That distinction mattered to the town and to her. She wiped the desk, sorted the photographs into one bin, and laid the ledger flat in the cabinet with packets of silica gel Clara had found in old storage boxes. She cleaned the green lamp's shade with a damp cloth, though the cord remained cut. Its brass stem emerged slowly from the grime, dull but honest. At noon, the mechanic from down the street came by with a socket set. "Clara said your side door's got an attitude," he said. His name was Walt Mercer. He had one clouded eye and hands permanently darkened around the nails. He planed the swollen edge of the door, by thin shavings adjusted the strike plate and made Mara lift and close it herself until the latch caught without force. Door should tell you yes or no, he said, not maybe. He refused payment and accepted only the thermos coffee Clara had brought. By dusk, Mara had cleared a safe path from the side door to the watchroom marked the bad stair with a second strip of tape and stacked salvageable items on a dry pallet brass nozzle too. Helmet fronts, the old clipboard, a coil of rope, and 3 intact glass jars labeled for nails. The bay did not look restored. It looked accountable. She stood at the threshold before leaving and listened. No bell, no mettere. Only a building beginning barely to breathe without drowning. The roster names brought people back one at a time. Clara did not post them online. She wrote 5 letters by hand, made 3 phone calls, and asked the church secretary for 2 addresses she pretended not to have memorized. By Saturday morning, a retired firefighter named Ben Morrow stood in the apparatus bay with a wool cap pulled to his eyebrows, staring at the winter duty card like it had accused him of something. "My uncle signed with the star," he said. Clara nodded. He did. What did the star mean? "We don't know yet." Bun took off his gloves and rubbed both hands over his face. He never talked about calls, talked about pancakes, bad coffee, and Captain Reed's temper. Never this. He came back after lunch with 2 sawhorses and a circular saw. A woman named Lydia Voss arrived next, carrying a box of contractor trash bags and a framed photograph of the station from 1983. Her father had driven the engine. She walked. The bay slowly touched the empty hooks and then began pulling nails from a warped board without being asked. By the end of the weekend, the station held the sounds of work in separate corners. Walt tightening the side door hinge. Bun cutting plywood for the inside of cracked windows. Lydia labeling salvaged pieces with painter's tape. Clara reading ledger entries only when someone needed proof that memory had a backbone. Denny came by to inspect the temporary work and grunted approval at the drain. Mara moved between them with her notebook, a broom, and a humility that did not know where to stand. She was used to earning her place by being useful until no one could object. Here, people kept handing her tasks as if her place had already been decided. "Hold this level," Ben said. "Write down 12 feet 4 inches, Lydia said. "Drink this before it goes cold," Clara said. Near 3, snow began again. Not hard, but steady enough to soften the street outside. The bay doors were opened halfway for air, while Walt worked on the track. Cold entered, carrying the smell of wet pavement and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Mara stood on the concrete apron and looked back. For the first time, she could see the whole bay at once without trash breaking the view. The drain line ran clear down the middle. The watch desk waited under its cleaned green lamp. The sealed cabinet held the ledger. The caution tape at the stairwell glowed yellow against old wood. Nothing was finished, but everything had been named. Bun and Walt wrestled the left bay door along its track. It stuck, shrieked, then shifted forward 6 inches. Again, Walt said. Mara stepped inside and put both hands against the weathered panel beside Lydia. On Ben's count, they pushed. The door, a flat blade of winter daylight, slid across the apparatus floor. No one cheered. The sound would have been too large for the moment. Ben only leaned his forehead against the door frame. Clara stood by the watch desk with one hand over her mouth, and Mara felt the cold light reach her boots, climb the concrete, and touch the old brass nozzle she had saved from the drain. The bay doors were open. Not wide, not smoothly, not for the public, but open. The temporary roof patch went on during a dry Tuesday with clouds moving fast over the tower. Denny would not let anyone call it a repair. "It is a pause," he said from the ladder. "Respect a pause and it may hold. Trust it too much and it will embarrass you." Bun passed up strips of leftover flashing from a roofing job outside town. Walt held the ladder. Mara stood below with the screws counted into a jar, handing them up one at a time because dropping anything on the concrete apron made everyone look up too quickly. The worst seam was where the hose tower met the lower roof. Leaves had packed there for seasons, holding water against brick and trim, until paint lifted in curled strips. Denny scraped out the rot-fitted flashing over the open edge and sealed the top with roofing cement that smelled sharp and tarry in the cold air. Inside, Lydia and Clara moved the document bins farther from the exterior wall. Mara cleaned the brass bell rope guide beneath the alarm board with a toothbrush and mineral oil, careful not to disturb the old mechanism. The bell itself remained rusted, its surface pitted and dark, but Ben climbed high enough to brush loose flakes from the bracket and check the bolts. "Leave the scars," Clara called up. Bun looked down, wasn't planning to polish history. By late afternoon, the leak over the rear stairs had slowed to one drop every few minutes. Mara watched the storage tub wait for water that no longer came steadily. The silence felt almost suspicious. The tower was braced the next day. Denny sistered 2 cracked supports with new lumber and marked the repair date in pencil on the inside face, small enough that a visitor would never notice. Mara saw him do it and understood. Some work was not meant to announce itself. It only needed to hold. When the wind came through the louvers that evening, the cable shifted, but did not jerk. The old bell stayed quiet. Mara stood below it in the watchroom, one hand on the alarm board, and felt the difference between a mystery solved and a building steadied. The receipt with her mother's name appeared because Mara dropped a pencil. It rolled under the metal cabinet where the document bins had first been stored, and when she crouched to retrieve it, she noticed a torn corner of paper wedged behind the base. She pulled gently. A folded receipt came free, brittle and dark at the crease half hidden by dust. The top line read Hawthorne Pharmacy, January 1999. Mara almost put it with the unsorted papers. Then she saw the name written across the back in Clara's Aunt Ruth's hand. Ellison Beth Scarf, Vapor Medicine Room Heater Loan. The station went very quiet around her. Beth Ellison had been Mara's mother before illness shortened her world to pill bottles, rent envelopes, and the chair near the kitchen window. Beth Ellison had once told Mara there had been an apartment fire when Mara was too young to remember. She had said it lightly, as if it were an inconvenience from another life. Smoke damage. A winter move. A red scarf bought from a church table because the first one smelled too much of burned plaster. Mara sat back on her heels. The red scarf was in her backpack, folded beside her sweater. She took it out with hands that did not feel attached to her arms. The wool was thin now, the edge repaired in 2 places with thread that did not match. Her mother had worn it every winter until Mara started wearing it after the funeral. Clara found her there 10 minutes later, receipt in one hand, scarf in the other. "Oh, Mara," she said. Mara shook her head once. "Don't." Clara stopped where she was. "I can't owe this place too," Mara said. "I can't owe it before I even found it." "You don't. My mother took help from them. Your mother survived a fire in January with a young child." Clara's voice stayed low. Someone answered. "That is not a debt designed to trap the child." Mara folded the receipt along its old line because unfolding it hurt to look at. The shame that rose in her was older than the station. Older than the car, tied to every office where she had explained why money was late and every counter where kindness came with a form. Clara sat on the bottom stair, leaving space between them. "My Aunt Ruth never had children," she said. "She kept baby blankets in the trunk of her car anyway. If she helped your mother, she would have counted that as the station doing its job." Mara pressed the scarf against her mouth. It smelled of dust now and wool and the faint lavender that might still be memory. Outside, Walt's socket wrench clicked against the bay door track. Ben laughed once at something Denny said. Work went on because buildings did not wait for grief to become tidy. Mara put the receipt into a paper sleeve and wrote her mother's name on a temporary label carefully without claiming more than the paper proved. That night, Mara slept in her car by choice. The church basement had room. Clara had offered the spare sofa in her den with the careful tone of someone trying not to frighten an injured thing. The station's watchroom had a space dry enough for a cot, though the agreement still said daylight only. Mara chose the hatchback because it was the last place where no one could ask her to belong. Frost gathered on the windshield before midnight. She wrapped the red scarf around both hands and watched the fire station across the street. One upstairs window had plywood fitted neatly from the inside. The bay doors closed straighter now. The patched tower seam shed water in a thin line instead of feeding the wall. She should have been glad. Instead, she felt cornered by kindness. In the morning, she did not go in when Clara opened the side door. She sat in the car until the older woman crossed the street and tapped once on the passenger window. Mara rolled it down an inch. "You running?" Clara asked. "I'm thinking about it. Those are cousins, but not twins." Mara almost smiled and hated that she almost did. Clara looked at the scarf in Mara's lap. "Finding your mother's name does not make you a project. It makes me part of the story. You already were. You rang the town office doorbell with a roof leak when you could have disappeared. The bell rang first, and you answered." Clara rested one hand on the car roof. A person can receive mercy without spending the rest of her life apologizing for it. Mara looked past her to the station. The front brick caught morning sun in dull red patches. For the first time, she imagined her mother younger than she had ever known her, standing in cold weather with smoke in her hair, accepting a scarf from someone who did not demand a confession of failure. "If I go back," and Mara said, "I need it to be work." "It is work," Clara said. "Useful work, not punishment." Mara closed her eyes for one breath. Then she opened the car door and stepped into the cold. The vote happened on a Thursday evening under buzzing lights while rain clicked against the municipal windows. More people came than the room could hold. Some stood in the hall. Ben brought the 1983 photograph. Lydia brought a list of salvageable materials. Denny brought his safety report with the word "stabilized" written in black ink underlined once. Mara brought the ledger. She did not read her mother's receipt. That belonged to a private room inside the story. Instead, she read 3 entries chosen by Clara: a coal delivery 2 nights over the feed store, a heater loan after a winter fire. Then she closed the book. "This fund was never large," Mara said. "That may be why it lasted. It did small things before small things became disasters." The mayor folded his hands. "And what are you asking this town to do?" Mara looked at Mr. Larkin, then Clara, then the old roster card resting in a plastic sleeve. "Pause the auction, lease the building for 1 year to a community trust while it becomes safe enough for a warming room and repair workshop. No promises bigger than the roof can hold. No speeches about saving everything. Just one corner warm." The room stayed quiet. Then Denny stood. "Roof still needs real work," he said, "but the girl's right about the corner." Others followed awkwardly without flourish. The bakery owner offered bread at closing. Walt offered basic maintenance. Lydia offered records and volunteer scheduling. Clara offered to serve as interim secretary of the trust if no one made her chair of anything with a gavel. The vote to pause the auction passed by 1. No one clapped at first. The margin was too narrow for triumph. Then someone in the hallway let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, and the room loosened. Mara walked back to the station after dark with Clara beside her. Rain had washed the concrete apron clean. The old bell hung above the bay doors, silent and imperfect. "It won't be yours," Clara said gently. "I know. Does that hurt?" Mara unlocked the side door. The latch caught smoothly under her hand. "Less than I thought." 4 months later, the first hard rain of spring came down clean and vertical, striking the station roof with 1,000 small taps and running properly into gutters. Denny still called temporary, though everyone knew better. Water moved away from the tower seam down the spout and across the gravel where Mara had dug a shallow trench with Walt's old mattock. She stood under the bay overhang and watched it go where it was told. The sign beside the side door had been painted by Lydia on a piece of salvaged oak from the locker bench. "Station lamp house warming room, repair bench. Emergency help open when the porch light is on." No grand opening had been announced. Clara said announcements made people dress wrong for useful work. Still, by 9 that morning, a coffee urn hissed on a safe new outlet in the watchroom. The bay floor had been washed to a dull gray, and folding chairs lined the wall below the old turnout hooks. The green-shaded lamp sat on the restored watch desk, rewired by a retired electrician who insisted his name not appear on any donor list. The ledger rested under glass in a shallow case Ben had built open to a page of early deposits. Private names were covered by narrow slips of archival paper. Beside it lay Captain Reed's covenant copied for reading, while the original stayed protected in town storage. The brass lamp fund key hung in a small shadow box with no explanation beyond its tag. Mara wore the navy coat because spring had not yet earned trust. The red scarf was folded over the back of the watch chair. She had stopped wearing it every day after finding the receipt, not because it meant less, but because it no longer had to carry everything. Her place was a small room behind the former bunk area, approved after 2 inspections. One argument about egress and a donated smoke detector in every space that would hold still long enough to receive one. It held a narrow bed, a metal shelf, 2 hooks, and a window facing the sycamores. Mara paid no rent the first year. In return, she kept the schedule logged repairs open during weather alerts and made sure no one left colder than they arrived if the station could help it. The bank had traced the old account. After fees were forgiven and paperwork corrected, the remaining balance was modest enough for fuel cards, motel vouchers. When the church basement filled blankets and a locked cash box for emergencies approved by 2 signatures. Mr. Larkin handled the forms with the solemn pride of a man who had discovered bureaucracy could occasionally behave like a tool. Near noon, Clara came in carrying a stack of donated towels. "You're frowning at the rain," she said. "I'm watching the patch." "You always watch the patch. It keeps me honest." Clara set the towels on a chair and looked around the watchroom. The cleaned brass nozzle sat on a shelf. The winter duty roster hung framed near the alarm board. The red pull handle remained disconnected but preserved with a small note explaining the old mechanical system. Above it, the hidden compartment had been left visible behind a hinged glass panel, empty now, except for a photograph of the canvas roll as it was found. Clara touched the edge of the watch desk. "My Aunt Ruth would have complained about the chairs. Too modern. Too many." She believed people told the truth faster when they had to stand. Mara smiled. The old bell had not rung by accident again. Denny fixed the louver, but left the cable in place, locked and labeled, because the story of how wind once found it mattered. For the reopening, Ben had made a simple hand pull that could strike the bell once without stressing the bracket. He tested it only after Denny glared at him from the ladder. 3 people began arriving as if by coincidence. Walt came with a toolbox and a toaster that needed a new cord. Lydia brought 2 boxes of children's books for the repair bench corner. The bakery owner left rolls in a covered tray and pretended not to see Mara write his name in the donation log. Mr. Larkin came after office hours, tie loosened, and checked the thermostat twice, though it worked fine. No one made a speech. Near 4. Clara found Mara standing beside the ledger case looking at the paper sleeve that held her mother's receipt. The actual receipt was not on display. Mara had made that decision herself. The story belonged to the fund, but Beth Ellison's name belonged first to Beth. "I used to think the scarf was the last thing she gave me," Mara said. Clara stood beside her. "Maybe it was also the first thing this place gave you." Mara watched rain bead on the front windows. Outside, the concrete apron shone dark and clean. "I don't know how to thank people who helped before I knew them." "You answer someone else." Clara's voice was quiet. "That is usually enough." At 5, Ben rolled the left bay door open. It moved with a low wooden rumble, not smooth yet, but willing. Spring rain silvered the street. The old bell waited above them, dark against the brick. Clara handed Mara the pull rope. "You should do it," Mara said. "I answered plenty of bells." Clara closed Mara's fingers around the rope. "This one found you." Mara looked back into the watchroom, the lamp glowing the ledger under glass. The towels folded the coffee urn. Breathing steam, the red scarf resting on the chair like a small banked flame. She thought of her first night on the concrete floor, the bell note moving through the cold, and how certain she had been that no one was coming. Then she pulled. The bell rang once over Briar Glen. The sound was not loud enough to gather a crowd from blocks away. It did not pretend the building was saved forever. It rolled across the wet street, touched the sycamores, and faded into the rain with a clean, steady dignity. For a moment, everyone inside the bay stood still. Then the coffee urn clicked. Walt cleared his throat. Lydia asked where to put the books. Mr. Larkin opened the door for an older man with a damp coat and a toaster under one arm. Work resumed as it always had because legacy without use was only decoration. Just before dusk, Mara saw a young woman standing under the edge of the overhang. One hand gripping the strap of a backpack, the other tucked into a sleeve against the cold rain. She looked at the open bay the way Mara once had, measuring warmth against pride, danger against need. Mara did not ask for her story. She stepped to the threshold and held the door wider. "There's coffee," she said, "and a dry chair." The young woman looked past her at the old watchroom, the lamp, the clean floor, the people moving without staring. Her eyes paused on the red scarf over the chair, then on the bell above the doors. "I don't have money," she said. Mara felt Clara beside her before she heard the older woman's cane touch the concrete. The young woman came in. The station did not look new. Its brick still held soot in the mortar. Its tower leaned by a truth no level could flatter. The bell wore rust like memory. But one corner was warm, and when the next person stood outside, ashamed to ask, someone was there to answer.